Hello everyone, and welcome to Fresh Master Channel. Today, we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
They say you don't notice the moment things start to fall apart. It's not one big explosion, not some dramatic event. It's a slow unraveling, a series of tiny shifts that only make sense in hindsight. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention to the details. The way Alicia's laughter had changed, becoming lighter, more distant. The way she started getting ready for nights out with an excitement that hadn't been there before. The way she had stopped reaching for me in the middle of the night. Our marriage hadn't always been like this. We used to be the couple people envied, the ones who couldn't keep their hands off each other, who shared inside jokes and knew exactly what the other was thinking with just a glance. I used to feel like the luckiest man alive, coming home to a woman who looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. But somewhere along the way, life happened. Work became exhausting, the kids drained every ounce of energy we had, and the moments we used to steal for ourselves slowly disappeared. We still loved each other, I was sure of that, but love wasn't always enough. The night before everything changed, I found myself awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling while Alicia slept beside me. The room was quiet except for her soft breathing, but my mind was loud, replaying moments I hadn't thought twice about before. The way she had started leaving for errands, dressed just a little nicer than usual, how her phone was always face down on the counter, the shift in the way she spoke to me, still loving, still warm, but with a hesitation that hadn't been there before. I told myself I was imagining things, but the unease sat heavy in my chest, refusing to let me sleep. The next morning, Alicia was already up before me, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, lost in thought. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment before she noticed me. "Morning," she said, offering a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I almost asked her then, "Are we okay?" But the words never left my mouth. Instead, I kissed her temple, grabbed my keys, and left for work, convincing myself that I was overthinking, that our love, our history, was unshakable, that nothing could come between us. But deep down, I already knew. I was about to lose something I wasn't ready to let go of. By the time my wife and I arrived at the Halloween party, it was already in full throttle. The music pounded through the walls, elaborate decorations transformed the space, and the energy buzzed with excitement. The moment I stepped inside, my gaze immediately landed on Alicia. Dressed in a sleek, form-fitting Catwoman costume, she exuded confidence, the dark material accentuating her toned figure while leaving just enough to the imagination. Even after 2 kids who were spending the weekend with my parents, she still looked as breathtaking as the day we first met. I didn't always stop to appreciate just how beautiful she was, but tonight it was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, my own costume left much to be desired. I'd gone with a basic pirate ensemble, not particularly creative and definitely not seductive, but at least I didn't look completely ridiculous. I felt decent enough in my outfit, though standing next to Alicia, who effortlessly commanded attention, I might as well have been invisible. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before disappearing into a conversation with friends, leaving me momentarily on my own. With nothing better to do, I made my way to the drinks table, where a heated debate was already underway among my buddies. Animated voices, exaggerated gestures. It was clear they were deep into one of those never-ending geek arguments. The topic? The age-old question. Who would win in a fight, Hulk or Superman? I sighed. Of all the things to discuss at a party, this was their fixation. The answer was obvious. Superman, no contest. Why was this even a debate? Still, I couldn't resist getting involved. Years of devouring Marvel and DC comics as a kid had given me enough knowledge to settle this once and for all. Or so I thought. Instead of resolving anything, my input only added fuel to the fire. Voices grew louder, hand gestures became more dramatic, and suddenly, we were a bunch of grown men regressing into teenage nerds, arguing passionately about superheroes, throwing in jokes, and shoving each other playfully. Surrounded by sultry nurses, seductive catwomen, and an array of revealing costumes, you'd think we'd have more interesting distractions. But no, the battle between Hulk and Superman had us completely hooked. Eventually, we had to call a ceasefire. Too much booze, too much noise, and too much partying left to waste the entire night arguing over fictional characters. I had already decided to take it easy on the drinking, since Alicia had no intention of being our designated driver. From across the room, I spotted her lounging on the couch with her best friend Susie, who, unsurprisingly, was also dressed as Catwoman. They had been inseparable since middle school, practically carbon copies of each other in everything from mannerisms to fashion sense. Their families even joked that one of them had been secretly switched at birth. Alicia and Susie, however, never found that joke amusing. Susie had married Dominic 2 years before Alicia and I tied the knot. Given how similar she and Alicia were, you might assume their husbands would be alike. That assumption couldn't be more wrong. I managed a group of restaurants, a demanding job that required leadership but not a suit and tie. I wasn't a pushover. I played baseball in high school and took up boxing in college. Sure, my gym visits had dwindled since settling into family life, but I wasn't out of shape. Dominic, on the other hand, worked in a factory, spending hours every day lifting heavy equipment. The guy practically lived at the gym, and it showed. He was built like a gladiator. Where I kept my hair short and neat, he sported long hair tied back in a ponytail, paired with a thick beard that gave him the look of an ancient warrior. If I was more of a Don Draper type, he was Khal Drogo. I never had anything against him, but we had nothing in common. He was just Susie's husband, and since Susie was Alicia's best friend, our paths crossed occasionally. That was the extent of our relationship. Tonight, though, he had gone all in, showing up as Tarzan, in freezing weather, just a loincloth. It was ridiculous. Classic Dominic, always seeking attention. As expected, he was in his element, surrounded by women, effortlessly charming them with flirtatious remarks and teasing gestures. He did this at every party, pushing the boundaries just enough to keep it playful but never quite crossing the line. And the women adored it. They laughed, blushed, leaned in closer, even Alicia. That irked me. I would have expected Susie, of all people, to disapprove of his antics. If the roles were reversed, I knew Alicia wouldn't tolerate it. But Susie just laughed along with the others, occasionally swatting his arm playfully instead of shutting it down. If anything, she seemed amused by how much attention he got. The more Dominic drank, the bolder he became, his flirting becoming more blatant, his hands lingering just a bit too long. A few husbands looked visibly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Maybe they were intimidated, maybe too drunk, maybe they just didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't care. I only knew one thing. If he so much as looked at Alicia the wrong way, we were leaving. As if sensing my irritation, Alicia suddenly appeared beside me. "Enjoying yourself, Greg?" she asked over the music. I nodded, taking a slow sip of my beer. She swayed slightly to the rhythm, her gaze flicking toward Dominic, watching him, admiring him. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't want her to look at him like that. I didn't want her to find him attractive. A sharp pang of jealousy settled in my stomach. "What kind of idiot wears a loincloth in this weather?" I muttered. Alicia snapped out of her thoughts and smirked. "You know, Dominic, he thrives on attention." I chuckled, but my beer suddenly tasted bitter. She caught the change in my mood and grinned. "Oh, don't tell me you're jealous," I scoffed. "Jealous? Of him? I don't need to strip down to get noticed." She laughed lightly, brushing off my reaction. "Of course not, honey." But then her gaze drifted back toward Dominic. As the night wore on, the party turned into a whirlwind of loud laughter, drunken conversations, and wild dancing. The booze flowed freely, lowering inhibitions and amplifying the chaos. Eventually, I forgot about Dominic and his absurd outfit, losing myself in the atmosphere. Until something changed. I hadn't seen Alicia in a while. A nagging sense of unease crept in. I scanned the room, searching for her, but she wasn't anywhere in sight. After a few minutes, I decided to go find her. I found her in the kitchen, with Dominic. They stood close, speaking in hushed tones, closer than I liked. A flicker of possessiveness surged through me. Dominic noticed me first, immediately stepping back. Alicia turned toward me, her expression shifting too quickly into a forced smile. "There you are," she said, her voice just a little too bright. "I was just coming to find you." I narrowed my eyes. "Really? I've been in the same spot all night." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before covering it up with an easy shrug. Dominic took the opportunity to slip away, leaving us alone. Alicia stepped toward me, her voice softer now. "Are you upset, babe?" I exhaled slowly, not in the mood for games. "What were you two talking about?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, you know how he is. He's just flirty. Always has been. You're reading too much into it." My jaw tightened. "That's what you're going with?" For a brief moment, she looked amused, then sighed. "I may have had a bit too much to drink. Don't mind me." Then, with a casual pat on my cheek, she walked away. For the rest of the night, I never saw them together again. But the lingering glances didn't stop. Maybe they were meaningless, or maybe they meant everything. Either way, they left a sick feeling in my gut. Needing a breather, I made my way upstairs to use the bathroom. As I stepped out, I found Dominic waiting for me. "You got a problem with me, Greg?" he slurred, eyes narrowed with drunken hostility. I frowned. "What?" He took a step closer, swaying slightly. "You always act like you're better than me, with your fancy car, your big house, like I'm beneath you." His words were thick with booze, his tone laced with resentment. I let out a slow breath. "You're drunk. Go home before you say something you'll regret." He smirked, his expression turning sharp, almost cruel. "Regret? Like telling you how good your wife is in bed?" My blood went ice cold. I stepped in, my voice low, steady. "Shut your mouth before I shut it for you." Dominic let out a dark chuckle, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "Fantasies are things that never happened, Greg. I've got memories." His words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then my fist moved before my brain even caught up. The impact sent him reeling, his head snapping back with a sickening crunch as he stumbled into the drywall, leaving a deep dent as he collapsed. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I turned and stormed downstairs, my vision blurring with pure rage. The sounds of the party faded into the background, drowned out by the pounding in my ears, and then I saw her, Alicia. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw everything. Guilt, fear, panic. "Greg, what?" She stopped mid-sentence. She didn't need to finish. The answer was all over my face. A shriek cut through the room. "Oh my God! Someone call an ambulance! Dominic's not moving!" I barely registered it. I just kept staring at Alicia, searching for something, anything, that still felt familiar. Had I ever really known her? The chaos erupted around me. People ran for the stairs. And then there was Susie, Dominic's wife, her voice slicing through the noise. "What the hell did you do to my husband?" Then came the blows, her fists slamming into my back, wild and furious. I barely felt them. Someone pulled her away, and Richard, our host, stepped between us. "Greg, what the hell is going on?" I ignored him. My focus was locked on Susie. My voice came out disturbingly calm. "Did you know?" She blinked. "What?" "Did you know he was screwing my wife?" The words hung in the air like a bang. She didn't yell, didn't deny it. She just stood there, staring at me with an expression that made my stomach twist, like she had always known. Alicia grabbed my arm. "Greg, we need to talk, but not here." I turned to her, my entire body shaking with barely contained fury, the kind that burns white hot, leaving only destruction in its wake. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were the only thing holding me together. "He's coming around!" someone shouted. Susie bolted up the stairs. But I couldn't bring myself to care. All I could think about was what I had just done. One punch, one stupid, reckless moment. I could have just ruined my entire life. Attack charges, jail time, everything I had built, gone, because of a drunken fool. Alicia clutched my arm tighter. "Greg, please, let's just go home." I turned to her, my voice devoid of emotion. "No, you can go home with your boyfriend and his wife. I'm leaving." I pushed past her, heading straight for the door. "Greg!" She chased after me, grabbing at my jacket. "You're not leaving me here. We need to talk." Her face was streaked with tears, but her anger burned just beneath the surface. What the hell did she have to be mad about? She was the one who cheated. I exhaled sharply. "I can't do this right now, Alicia. Don't come home." My voice was empty, detached. I might already be facing charges for knocking out that idiot. I don't need domestic violence added to the list. Her expression darkened. "Screw you, Greg. Screw you." Her voice cracked as she stepped closer, eyes blazing with a fury that almost matched my own. "You want to knock me too? Go ahead. Maybe then you'd actually acknowledge me for once. God, at least then you'd be touching me." Her words hit like a sucker punch to the gut. I clenched my fists. "That's your excuse? I don't fall at your feet every damn night, so you screw around behind my back. That's your justification." She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her defiant stare told me everything. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "For the record, Alicia, I work my A off to provide for this family. Maybe if you had a real job, you'd understand what it's like to come home exhausted." That's when I realized we had an audience, and they were hanging onto every word. Alicia let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, poor Greg. Too tired for his wife, but not too tired to sit in front of his laptop watching adult films every damn night. Silence, heavy, suffocating. She wasn't done. Maybe if you actually paid attention to the real woman in your bed instead of fantasizing about fake ones, I wouldn't have had to cry to my best friend about how my own husband doesn't want me anymore. Her voice cracked. Her hands trembled at her sides. Anger, hurt. But for me, it was the final nail in the coffin. I had never felt so humiliated. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat was dry, my mind blank, and I could feel their stares. Friends, neighbors, people I had known for years, some in shock, some in disgust, some in quiet amusement, entertained by the drama unfolding before them. I had no choice but to walk away. I turned, stepping out into the cold night air. Behind me, Alicia's voice rang out one last time, chasing me as I started the car and drove off into the darkness. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my life shattered into pieces I'd never be able to put back together. This narrative is influenced by true events. In case you're curious, no, I'm not Greg, I'm Richard, the guy who hosted the Halloween party. Yes, I'm the one dealing with the Dominic-shaped hole in my wall, the one disturbingly close to my daughter's bedroom. I chose to share this story from Greg's perspective because I wanted to capture his emotions. The fury, the embarrassment, the sting of betrayal. To do that, I had to imagine myself in his shoes. Since that chaotic night, my wife and I haven't stopped dissecting it. It's become a recurring topic in our household. Maybe it's unhealthy to get so absorbed in someone else's drama, but witnessing it unfold was like watching a car crash. You just couldn't look away. And we weren't the only ones left with questions. Susie, Greg's wife, wasn't angry when he revealed Alicia's affair with Dominic. She didn't even seem surprised. So she already knew. But how? Was it some kind of arrangement? Something else? Let's be real. A ménage à trois involving those two would rival any adult film. How long had this been going on? Thinking back, I now recall noticing the way Alicia and Dominic exchanged glances that night. There was definitely an undercurrent. Am I reading too much into it? Or maybe I'm not. One thing is clear. Greg neglected Alicia, not just physically, but emotionally too. Does that justify infidelity? No. But does it provide some context? Absolutely. When a woman feels consistently rejected, the temptation to look elsewhere increases, especially when her husband shows more interest in other women, whether in person or on a screen. Even adult films can cross the line into betrayal if it makes a partner feel unwanted. By the way, Alicia is stunning in real life. Honestly, any man with a pulse would be drawn to her. But this situation proves an age-old saying. For every gorgeous woman, there's a man tired of being with her. The bigger question is, what happens now? For now, everyone involved is keeping quiet. But secrets like these never stay hidden forever. It's only a matter of time. Although this account is based on real events, I wasn't present for everything. I didn't witness the conversation between Greg and Dominic before the fight. I only heard secondhand accounts. So I took some creative liberties. I can't claim to know Greg's exact thoughts that night, but I can imagine what mine would have been. I empathized with him. Alicia betrayed him. Regardless of her reasons, it was a deep betrayal. Could I forgive something like that? Or would it lead to divorce? Honestly, I'm not sure. Of course, I'm not impartial. Greg's a good friend. And by the way, he was absolutely right. Superman would annihilate the Hulk. Heat vision, flight, super speed. It's no contest unless kryptonite is involved. But I digress. Mr. Kirkson, there's a call on line 1, my assistant announced. I shook off my train of thought. Who is it, Betty? It's Mr. Ford, sir. Greg. I'd been trying to reach him since that disastrous night at my Halloween party. But until now, radio silence from all 4 of them. Naturally, I had questions, countless questions. That night had it all. Lust, violence, treachery, a spectacle of drama, a modern-day David and Goliath. Except this time, Goliath had a weak jaw, and David was fueled by pure rage. Put him through, Betty. Sir, he sounds upset. Well, of course he's upset, I scoffed. His wife humiliated him in front of everyone. If he wasn't upset, I'd be concerned. The line clicked as the call connected. Greg, hey, man, I've been trying to reach you since... I don't want to hear it. His voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath I heard it, a slow, simmering anger. The kind that doesn't explode, it chokes. Even over the phone, his emotions were palpable. They hung in the silence, heavy and oppressive. So, do you want to talk? I asked cautiously. He laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. It was short, sharp, almost a sneer. Why the hell would I want to talk to you, Richard? My so-called friend. Sarcasm dripped from his words. What's next? Are you planning to write a sequel to your little story? Keep your audience updated on how the fool who couldn't satisfy his wife is holding up? Damn, he'd read my story. Now, in addition to being furious with his unfaithful wife, her backstabbing best friend, and her brutish lover, Greg was mad at me too. Great. Greg and I went way back to high school. He played baseball, I played football. Different crowds, but we struck up a solid friendship. After graduation, we drifted apart. He went to college and I joined the Air Force. Years later, when I returned home, we reconnected like no time had passed. Greg worked his way up from managing an Olive Garden to overseeing multiple locations as a district manager. Meanwhile, I spent a decade in the Air Force before transitioning into a civilian role with a private contractor. Our lives had taken different paths, but our bond remained strong until now. Today, Greg was seething with anger. Not good. Normally, I'd try to diffuse the tension with humor, but this wasn't the time. I especially liked the ending, Greg interrupted before I could say anything. I stayed silent. You know, the part where I tuck my tail and run like a coward? Nice touch. His words cut deep. In that moment, I felt like the worst friend imaginable. There was no defense. Greg, where are you? We need to talk. You know what's funny, Richard? His tone dropped, sending chills down my spine. I've never been more popular. Everyone wants to talk to me. Must be my magnetic personality. Then I heard it. His voice was slurred. The distinct sound of liquid pouring into a glass, ice clinking. Greg, are you drunk? A humorless laugh escaped him. No, Richard. I was drunk an hour ago. Now, who the hell knows what I am? Damn it. I was a lousy friend. I could admit that. But now, I had to fix this. Where are you, Greg? I grabbed my coat and keys. Work could wait. This couldn't. Screw you, Richard. He spat coldly. I'm not telling you where I am. Don't even think about looking for me. If you do, I swear I'll make you regret it. The line went dead. It didn't matter. I already knew where he was. Greg had a favorite bar, Moe's. He liked it for the barmaid, Karen. She was friendly but firm about her boundaries, which only made her more appealing. When I arrived, my stomach dropped. Greg was at the bar, alone. The place was nearly empty. I glanced at my watch. Just past noon. Karen noticed me first and waved. Her expression was concerned, despite the forced smile. Is he yours? She asked, nodding toward Greg. I nodded. Yeah. Give me a second. Greg, I began. His fist came out of nowhere. A crack echoed, and my vision blurred. Jesus. No wonder Dominic went through the wall. I hit the floor, tasting blood as I wiped my mouth. Greg stood over me, his chest heaving, fists clenched. After a moment, he exhaled sharply, turned back to the bar, and slumped onto his stool. I pushed myself up slowly, signaling to Karen, who had paused mid-wipe, her eyes wide with alarm. She looked like she was debating whether to intervene, but I gave her a small nod. It was under control. She hesitated for a moment before stepping back, still watching closely. I let out a deep breath, slid onto the stool next to Greg, and ran a hand over my aching jaw. Feel better now? Greg took a slow sip of his beer before shaking his head. This off the record? He asked, sarcasm dripping from his voice. I smirked. At least he wasn't completely out of it. That was something. Where'd you stop, Mother? He muttered bitterly. I frowned. What? He sighed, swirling his drink. You and your mom get along? You've met my mom, Greg. Yeah. Still remember how she patted me down to make sure I wasn't sneaking anything into her house. We both chuckled at the memory. Then his expression darkened again. For the love of God, Richard, he muttered. Living through that night was bad enough. Then I had to read about it, knowing everyone else knew it was about me. I sighed. Greg, I just told the story. It wasn't about embarrassing you. Besides, nobody knows it's you. He turned to me slowly, giving me a pointed look. 2 cat women and a pirate, he said flatly. Oh, and a pirate who threw Tarzan through a wall. How many Halloween parties do you think had that exact sequence of events? I opened my mouth. Closed it. Okay, fair point. Greg clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists. For a second, I thought he might take another swing at me. You think this is funny? I raised my hands in surrender. No, I said quickly. You're right, Greg. I was an idiot. I shouldn't have put you in that situation, and I'm sorry. He exhaled sharply. Well, I'm not sorry for decking you, I grinned, rubbing my sore jaw. Yeah, well, you still kick like a wimp. No wonder you always got your A kicked in boxing. That did it. The tension finally cracked, the ice melting between us. Minutes later, I had him out of the bar and into my car. As we were leaving, Karen caught my arm, pulling me into a quick hug. "Take care of him, Richard," she murmured. "He's been through hell." My jaw was still throbbing, already swelling, but I had Greg with me. That was what mattered. By the time I got him strapped into the passenger seat, he was already out cold, like he hadn't slept in days. Instead of taking him to his mom's, I brought him home. On the drive, I made a call. "John." "What's up, Richie Rich?" came the familiar, too cheerful voice. John was the kind of guy who never really left his 20s behind. Great friend, but immature as hell. The type of guy wives gave the side eye whenever their husbands spent too much time with him. He was also the one who had started the Hulk versus Superman argument at the party. "John, I need a hand. Found Greg at Moe's, wasted. Need help getting him inside. Damn, glad you found him. After what that woman pulled, I half expected him to put a bullet in his head." Minutes later, John pulled up behind my SUV and we got to work. Hauling 200 pounds of unconscious weight wasn't easy, but we managed to get Greg onto the couch in my basement. We talked for a bit before John left, making me promise to keep him updated. With Greg passed out, I found myself in a rare, quiet house. I didn't want to leave in case he woke up confused, so I made the most of it. Grilled a steak, baked a couple of potatoes, flipped through the sports channels, and settled on a documentary. Not long after, my wife Nikki walked in with the kids. "You're home early," she noted, kissing my cheek. The kids barely acknowledged me before dashing upstairs. "I found Greg at Moe's completely trashed. Brought him back here. He's knocked out in the basement." Her expression shifted, concern mixed with unease. "Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't want the kids around that." "He'll be fine, Nikki. I'll keep an eye on him." She reached up to touch my face, but I instinctively flinched. That's when she noticed the swelling. "Richard, what the hell? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine. Don't worry about it." "Rich, I don't like this. Get him out of here." "Honey, the guy just found out very publicly that his wife was cheating. He lost it. Who wouldn't? And he's been dealing with it alone. If that means I take a hit or two, so be it." I smirked. "Besides, my jaw's a little tougher than Tarzan's. He might want to rethink his costume next year." That got a laugh. Watching Tarzan get his A handed to him by a pirate was actually hilarious. I doubt Jane was amused. "No," she admitted, grinning, "but Tarzan definitely got what was coming to him." "Dominic should spend less time lifting weights and more time practicing his punches," Nikki snorted. "Or at least learning how to dodge." We chuckled, and for a brief moment, things felt normal again. Later, I checked in on Greg. His thunderous snoring confirmed he was alive, if nothing else. I grabbed a pillow and shoved it under his head, immediately regretting it. The stench of booze hit me like a brick wall. "What the hell, Greg?" I muttered, gagging. I needed fresh air. Hours later, a zombie-like figure shuffled into the kitchen. Bloodshot eyes, face full of regret. Nikki took one look at him and shot me a silent handle, "This or he's out look." I sighed and stood up. "How you feeling, man?" he groaned. "Like my wife cheated on me, embarrassed me in front of everyone, and then ran me over with a semi-truck." "Well, at least your memory's intact. 2 out of 3 ain't bad." His tired eyes narrowed. "Oh, my memory's just fine." He sighed. "I also remember your damn story." I rubbed my jaw. "Do you also remember punching me in the face because of it?" He frowned. "That part's fuzzy. You might need to jog my memory." There was no real hostility in his voice. "Greg, I really am sorry. I didn't expect so many people to see that post. And I definitely didn't think you'd find out." "Well, you were wrong." He ran a hand through his hair. "A bunch of people read it. Some guy even messaged me, saying he heard about the party from a friend, then came across your story online." "Who?" "You wouldn't know him. Some guy named Harry from Virginia." I burst out laughing. "Harry Inva?" Greg's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you know Harry?" "Of course. Have you met him?" Greg rolled his eyes. "Yeah, loudmouth, but a decent guy once you get past the ego. Oh, and by the way, he took my side." "And?" I smirked. "He thinks I'm an a-hole?" Greg cracked a smile. "Pretty sure he thought that before reading your story." I chuckled. Greg nodded, finally letting out a real, genuine laugh, the first I had heard from him in weeks. I clapped him on the back, and this time he didn't flinch or tense up. That was progress. "Richard, why the hell did you make me look like a coward in your story? Did I really just take off, like some scared little punk?" "Greg, you dropped that guy with one punch. I half expected you to go full Mike Tyson and bite his ear off. If you'd fought like that in college, you'd have been a champion. Nobody thinks you're weak." "Yeah, well, screw you. It was just a hobby," he muttered. "Idiot." Then finally, he grinned and shook his head. I really laid him out, huh? A flicker of pride crossed his face. Damn right. I bet your weak A couldn't do that, he teased. Nope, I admitted. I'd need at least 2 hits. That finally did it. He laughed, and for the first time since that disastrous night, he looked like himself again. Rich, what happened after I left? I kept expecting the cops to show up. I leaned against the counter and let out a long breath. You want the recap of Halloween? The aftermath? The second you tore out of there, Alicia collapsed, sobbing like she'd just been sentenced to life in prison, full-on hysterics. It was surreal, watching a woman in a Catwoman suit have a complete breakdown in front of a room full of people. Nikki rushed over, got her onto the couch. Meanwhile, the other Catwoman, Susie, was half-carrying Tarzan, a.k.a. Dominic, down the stairs. The guy was a mess, clutching his head while his wife practically dragged him. He was finished. Greg exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Yeah, well, he had it coming. No argument there. But Alicia, the moment she saw them together, she lost it. I swear, one second she was crying, and the next, she was lunging. Her voice had cut through the room like a whip. You selfish fool! What the hell did you say to Greg? You ruined everything, you piece of crap! Dominic, already humiliated and probably concussed, suddenly had to dodge a furious woman in leather and heels. Susie immediately threw herself between them. Alicia, stop! Cut it out! She yelled, shielding her husband. Dominic didn't even try to defend himself. The fact that his wife had to step in and protect him from his mistress just made him look even worse. But Alicia wasn't done. She kept shouting. You had to open your mouth, huh? You couldn't just let it go? What the hell is wrong with you? Greg stared at the table, shaking his head. Jesus. Dominic just stood there, looking like it was finally sinking in, like he was just now realizing how bad he'd screwed up. I think that punch knocked some sense into him. He knew he was the reason everything had fallen apart. And then, in true pathetic form, Dominic mumbled, Alicia, I'm sorry, I was drunk. The second the words left his mouth, Alicia crumpled to the floor again. What the hell am I supposed to do now, Susie? She sobbed. What am I supposed to do? Greg let out a bitter chuckle. Yeah. Well, that's her problem to figure out. I nodded. After that, they had to haul Dominic off to the ER. Turns out you literally knocked some sense into him. You gave him a concussion. Greg's lip twitched, but there was no real amusement in it. Good. He actually wanted to press charges, but Susie and Alicia shut it down. Apparently, Alicia begged him not to. She knew that if you got arrested, there'd be 0 chance of ever getting you back. Greg let out a dry, humorless laugh. There's no chance of that anyway. I nodded. So, what about you? You just disappeared. We heard your tires screech, your engine roar, and then nothing. I wanted to follow you, but my SUV was blocked in. I was honestly afraid you might wreck. Greg sighed. I had to get out of there. I needed to breathe. Think, process it. I couldn't deal with all those eyes on me, watching, whispering, judging. I just needed space. So you went to your mom's place. He let out another sigh. Yeah. You know things were bad if I actually went back there. Damn it. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I sped through side streets, ignoring stop signs, traffic lights, and speed limits. I had no destination, just the need to get away. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the glowing screen. Alicia's name, her face, a picture I had once adored. Now, a lie. I remembered taking that photo back when I was head over heels, completely devoted. And for what? So she could sleep with Dominic, kiss him, run her hands over him the way she used to with me? The thought made me sick. The phone rang again and again. I snapped. I yanked the battery out and tossed the useless device onto the seat. Finally, silence. No more lies. I drove, lost in my own torment. Visions of her and Dominic wrapped up in each other, playing like a damn movie I couldn't shut off. Then suddenly I eased off the gas. I blinked. And there it was, my parents' house. I had no memory of the drive. My subconscious had brought me home. I turned off the engine, exhaled, and stepped out. No matter how far kids go, they always keep a key to their childhood home, just in case. Inside, nothing had changed. Same couch, same lamp, same coffee table. My world had crumbled, but this place remained frozen in time. A voice cut through the silence. Who's there? My mom, sharp, alert. I could picture her now, gripping something heavy, ready to defend herself. It's me, Ma! A pause. Then, Gregory? Yeah. The hallway light flicked on, making me squint. For God's sake, why are you sneaking around? Trying to give me a heart attack? Nice to see you too, Mom. She appeared, petite, dressed in floral pajamas, tight curlers in her hair. She studied me, frowning. "Why do you look like an idiot?" "Ah, right. The pirate costume. I had forgotten. Most of it was gone, but the tattered shirt and boots remained." No wonder she was confused. "Long night," I muttered. "I'm staying here for a bit. The kids come home tomorrow, but I'll be back after that. I'll explain later, just not in front of them." No emotions, no speeches, just a fact. That's how our family worked. She gave me a once-over, then nodded. "You know where everything is." She turned, disappearing down the hall. "And lock the damn door." The next morning, I turned my phone back on. 29 missed calls, 15 from Alicia, a few from Richard, some from other partygoers. None of them mattered. Half were checking in out of nosy curiosity. The rest probably felt sorry for me. I had bigger concerns. Was Dominic in the hospital? Had he pressed charges? Was I about to be arrested? I left before my mom woke up, scribbling a note on the counter. Left early. If Alicia calls, tell her I'll reach out when I'm ready. She can take the kids if she wants. If not, I'll bring them home later. It was Sunday. No work. I needed something strong. So I went to the bar. The weeks blurred together after that. I crashed at my mom's, only leaving to see the kids. Alicia and I barely spoke. At first she tried, but I shut her down. She left frustrated, her eyes red from tears. One night as I was heading out, I overheard her on the phone. Not with Dominic, with Susie. Was that better? I didn't know. I spent my free time between my mom's place and the bar. My dad was out of town, so it was just the two of us. She didn't push for details, just asked what I planned to do. I shrugged. No clue. Her response? You'll figure it out. That was it. No lectures, no forced conversations, just quiet understanding. I called in sick, took some personal days. I wasn't ready to face the world. Even though no one from work had been at the party, word spread. Small town gossip. I wasn't just the guy with a cheating wife. I was the guy whose marriage imploded in public. Poor Greg. Too tired to touch his wife, but had time for adult films. Maybe if he wasn't glued to his laptop drooling over fake women, his wife wouldn't have cried to her best friend. How do you come back from that? You don't. I shut my phone off completely. Calls poured in constantly. Alicia, Richard, John, Susie, all desperate for me to pick up. Screw them. The only good news? No cops. Maybe Dominic was too embarrassed to press charges. Maybe he didn't want to admit he got knocked out by a guy dressed as a pirate. Either way, I didn't care. What stung the most? My friends. They texted, they left voicemails, but no one showed up. That's when I realized something. When people don't know what to say, they disappear. Not because they don't care, but because they're clueless on how to help. It was both a curse and a relief. With no distractions, my mind spiraled. The images of Alicia and Dominic replayed like a horror film on repeat. The only way to quiet it? Drink. Karen, the bartender, became my only constant. The hardest part about staying with my mom wasn't the lack of privacy or the weird feeling of stepping backward into my childhood. It was being away from my kids. Seeing them meant seeing Alicia, like knowing there was a warm bed waiting for me, but having to crawl through broken glass to get there. So I drank more, and I probably would have kept drinking if Karen hadn't shown me something one night at the bar. She slid her phone across the counter. You might want to see this. I glanced down. Caught Catwoman. At first the headline meant nothing, then I read the details. 2 Catwomen. A pirate. Damn Tarzan. Superman versus Hulk. My stomach dropped. I knew this story. That fool, I muttered. I grabbed my phone, powered it on, and punched in Richard's number. So what's next? Divorce, separation, or just knocking her out? Greg let out a dry chuckle, staring at his untouched plate. Why do I have to choose? He said it like a joke, but there was no humor in his voice. I could see it. His mind was stuck, replaying that night over and over, haunted by Alicia's words like a blade twisting in his gut. I hesitated before asking, look, this might be too personal and you can tell me to go to hell, but the adult films. What was she talking about? His face reddened. So what? I watch sometimes. Not every damn day. His tone sharpened. Like she doesn't? Like you don't? Of course I do, I shrugged. But she made it sound like you were choosing that over her. Was that true? His jaw tightened. Go to hell, Richard. I raised my hands in surrender. Just trying to understand. You two always seemed solid. I didn't see this coming. Greg sighed, dragging his fork in slow circles across his plate. She doesn't get it. Get what? He rubbed his face, frustration flickering in his eyes. I work 10, 12 hours a day. I handle everything. Investors, pissed off customers, HR nightmares, lawsuits. By the time I get home, I'm wiped. He paused, his voice lowering. And Alicia, she needs a lot of buildup. Takes 30 minutes just to get her in the mood. Then she wants different positions, dirty talk, constant engagement. And don't get me wrong, when I can, it's amazing. But I can't do that every night. Not after the kind of days I have. I leaned back, letting that sink in. Greg exhaled. I know I'm lucky. Most guys complain their wives barely want them. That's not my issue. But sometimes I just want to come home and not have to give more of myself. He looked at me. You get that? I nodded. Yeah, I get it. When I walk through that door, I don't want to be a boss or a husband or a dad. I just want to exist. I hesitated, then asked, before the party, how long had it been? He blinked, shaking his head. I don't even know, Rich. I didn't realize how long it had been. Understanding passed between us. Then I saw it, that flicker of anger in his eyes. But that doesn't excuse what she did, he said coldly. I didn't cheat. I didn't humiliate her. Why didn't she just talk to me? I sighed. Maybe for the same reason you never told her why you watched those movies. His gaze sharpened. Communication is hard, I said. Especially when you don't realize something needs to be said. His jaw tensed. How the hell do you tell your wife you're unhappy? You just say it, I answered. I'm unhappy, Greg scoffed. Like it's that easy. I smirked. Since we're clearing the air, about my wall. He rolled his eyes. Consider us even for that damn story. Idiot. I thought punching me in the face evened things out. Not even close. I laughed. For the first time in days, Greg actually looked like himself again. Then I caught movement at the doorway. Nikki. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something urgent in her eyes. I walked over. What's up? She leaned in, voice low. Alicia knows Greg's here. She's on her way. I froze. Freaking John, I muttered. He must have called her, probably to chew her out, and ended up giving away Greg's location. I rubbed my face. Nikki, stop her at the door. She held up her hands. No way. He's been running from this long enough. I clenched my jaw. She cheated on him, Nikki. Or did you forget? She folded her arms. Oh, I remember. There's a hole in my wall to prove it. I turned back to Greg. He was still absently pushing food around his plate, completely unaware of the storm heading his way. What do you want me to do, Nikki? Her expression softened. You can be his friend. You can help him, but you can't shield him from this. She patted my chest. This is his fight. I sighed, turning to break the news. Before I could, Greg spoke. I heard you, he muttered, lifting his head. His face was unreadable. You suck at whispering. His eyes met mine. She's on her way. Greg rubbed his chin, wincing slightly, then let out a slow breath. Determination settled over his features as he finally pushed away from the table. All right, he said, voice steady. His gaze locked onto mine. I'm ready. Without another word, he stood up and walked straight out the back door. The sky was ablaze with deep oranges and reds, stretching endlessly across the horizon. It was the kind of sunset that could make a person forget their troubles, if only for a moment. For a split second, I let myself absorb it. Then her voice shattered the stillness. Greg? Baby? And just like that, the moment was gone. I didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her, just kept my eyes on the fading light. Alicia hesitated, then sat beside me on Richard's back porch, pulling her knees to her chest like a child seeking comfort. I've been looking everywhere for you, she murmured. Wrong move. I barely whispered my response. The same words I had said the night I caught her whispering with Dominic in the kitchen. I was in the same place all night. She stiffened, inhaling sharply. Greg, we need to talk. I nodded, but still refused to look at her. Even in my peripheral vision, I could see the evidence of her guilt. Swollen eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, the weight of regret pressing down on her. I love you. I shook my head. Don't say that. Greg, please. No, I snapped. You don't get to say you love me after humiliating me like that. You turned our marriage into a public joke. I would never have done that to you. She flinched, but recovered quickly. You did this, she said, her voice rising. You stormed downstairs like a madman and made sure everyone knew. You could have pulled me aside, waited until we were alone, but no. You turned it into a damn spectacle. I clenched my jaw. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd acted on instinct, blinded by rage. I exhaled slowly. Fine, I'll own that. But I didn't start this, Alicia. Your boyfriend did. He made sure I knew exactly what you'd done. Her breath hitched. I reacted the only way I knew how, I continued, my voice low, controlled. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. But I didn't betray you. I didn't let someone else rub my infidelity in your face. I finally turned to look at her. The anger drained from her expression, replaced by something heavier. Regret. I know, Greg, she whispered. I shook my head. Do you, though? Her face hardened, something reigniting in her. You may not have cheated, Greg, but you weren't there for me, she said, voice trembling. Do you remember my birthday? The night I dressed up for you? Spent an hour getting ready. Lotion, perfume, hair, everything? She swallowed hard. Do you? I did. That was the night I fired Frank, my assistant manager, a guy I had trusted, only to find out he had been sleeping with a subordinate. I'd vouched for him, defended him, and in the end, I was the one left cleaning up the mess. By the time I got home, I was drained. But I hadn't forgotten her birthday. I made dinner reservations. I had plans. Only, that wasn't what she had wanted that night. We went to dinner, I said carefully, and we were together afterward. She let out a hollow laugh. We had sex, Greg. There's a difference. Her voice cracked. You barely touched me. And when I tried to hold you afterward, you turned away and said you were tired. I stayed silent. I gave you space, she continued. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, you weren't in bed. Her voice wavered. I went looking for you. I knew what she was going to say. You were watching adult films, she whispered. Sitting there in the dark, getting off to strangers while I was alone in our bed. The words hit like a gut punch. And then she broke. Her shoulders shook, her breath hitching, but she didn't hold back the sobs this time. I just sat there. Something inside me shifted. Until now, Alicia had been the villain, the cheater, the liar, the one who had ruined everything. Now I wasn't so sure. I get it, I said finally, my voice quiet. I took you for granted. Her red-rimmed eyes snapped to mine. Do you? Do you really? She asked, her voice raw with emotion. Do you know how much that night broke me? How it felt to give everything, only to realize I wasn't enough? Her hands clenched into fists. I don't think you do. Silence. After that, I stopped asking for you, she continued. I told myself I wouldn't beg. If you wanted me, you'd come to me. And you waited. She nodded. And you never did. So you slept with Dominic, I said, voice flat. Because he made you feel wanted. She wiped at her face. Yes, him and Susie. I tensed. Both? She exhaled slowly. Susie and I had a moment in high school. We were drunk. It happened. We blamed the booze and never talked about it again. A sinking feeling churned in my stomach. Years later, I went to her house crying, she admitted, feeling worthless. I told her I needed to drink. Her breathing turned uneven. So we drank. The pain dulled, but didn't disappear. How did that lead to you sleeping with both of them? I asked, my voice eerily calm. She swallowed hard. Dominic came home, found us drunk. Susie told him how I felt, how I thought I was invisible to you. He started saying how beautiful I was, how sexy. Susie agreed. Her tone was detached now, like she was telling someone else's story. The old high school thing came up, she said, and Dominic got excited. He told us to kiss. I clenched my jaw. We were drunk, so we did. At first it was a joke, but then we kept going. And when I finally pulled away, Dominic was there. He leaned in and I didn't stop him. She exhaled shakily. From there, everything escalated. I forced myself to stay still. How many times? She turned her gaze to the sky as if looking for an answer in the stars. Twice. It stung. The first time, a drunken mistake, was bad enough, but the fact that she had gone back? That was something else entirely. I swallowed down the rising nausea. At the party, in the kitchen, I asked, my voice devoid of emotion, what were you and Dominic talking about? Her expression darkened. Guilt? Anger? He was drunk, she admitted. He told me how good I looked, that he wanted me to come over later, to pick up where we left off. My fists curled. I tried to shut him down, she continued. I told him it was a mistake, that we couldn't do this again. She hesitated. Then he started getting handsy. And that's when I walked over? She nodded. Yes. I exhaled slowly. And that's when you folded your guilt into a neat little excuse. Her jaw tightened. I was angry, Greg. Seeing Dominic act like that reminded me of how you made me feel. Were you going to go? I asked coldly. Since he appreciated you so much? Her head snapped up. No, she held my gaze, voice raw. I was hoping you'd finally ask me. Something inside me fractured. Alicia's voice was barely above a whisper. I chose the Catwoman costume because I knew you loved Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. She swallowed hard. You once told me you fell for her because of that suit. I saw the way you looked at me in it. Her breath hitched. For the first time in forever, I felt desirable again. I almost skipped the party, Greg. I thought maybe, finally, you'd see me the way you used to. I inhaled sharply, bracing myself. I was hoping that when we got home, you'd take me, she continued. Then Dominic happened. She spat his name like poison. I shook my head. None of this would have happened if you hadn't slept with him to begin with. Why didn't you just talk to me, Alicia? Her gaze dropped to the floor. I don't know, she murmured. I really don't. A humorless chuckle escaped me. Plenty of blame to go around, huh? She turned to me, eyes full of fragile hope. So, what now? I heard the desperation in her voice. Greg, I don't want to lose you. I love you. I would do anything to fix this. My mind raced. Could I forgive her? Could we ever move past this? I exhaled. I don't know, Alicia. It would take a lot. Hope flickered brighter in her expression. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered, gripping my hand. Just give me a chance. I studied her face, wanting to believe her. Maybe, just maybe, we could repair what was broken. All right, I said slowly, but there are conditions. First, we need counseling. Non-negotiable. We have to learn how to communicate. She nodded eagerly. Yes, anything. Second, I continued, you have to cut ties with Susie. The light in her eyes dimmed. Her grip on my hand loosened. What? You can't be friends with Susie anymore, I repeated, firm but calm. Her expression twisted in confusion and disbelief. Greg, why would you ask me that? I exhaled through my nose, my patience thinning. Are you serious? Her hands trembled. Alicia, you didn't just cheat on me. You did it with her and her husband. How am I supposed to heal if you keep them in your life? Every time I see you with her, I'll wonder if it's happening again. You're asking me to rebuild trust while keeping the source of the betrayal within arm's reach. She flinched like I had struck her. Tears welled in her eyes. You're making me choose between my best friend and my husband? I clenched my jaw. Yeah, Alicia, I am. She shook her head, her voice breaking. I can't do that, Greg. Please don't make me. And just like that, something inside me shattered completely. Strangely, this hurt more than the cheating itself. No anger to mask the pain. No blind rage to dull the ache. Just cold, crushing clarity. I wasn't enough. Not completely. She loved me, but she loved Susie too. And she wouldn't, or maybe couldn't choose. Dominic had never been the real problem. He was just the symptom. This was the disease. I exhaled slowly, my voice hollow. Then we're done. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at me, searching for some way to change my mind. She didn't answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. Less than a year later, we were divorced. It took that long because Alicia fought it with everything she had. She begged, pleaded, humiliated herself. She showed up at my job, breaking down in front of my coworkers, begging me not to leave. For a second, I almost wavered, but I couldn't. As long as she refused to let go of Susie, I knew I'd never fully have her. I'd always be sharing her heart. And no marriage, no love, can survive that. A year later, the wounds are still raw. There were no winners. Greg and Alicia do their best to co-parent, keeping things civil for the kids. As for me, I've lost track of how many nights I've been Greg's sounding board. But this Halloween, there was a silver lining. He showed up with a date. No Catwoman costume in sight. Maybe she's just a rebound. Maybe she's something more. Either way, it's progress. Healing doesn't happen overnight. Love doesn't just disappear. But moving forward, that happens one step at a time.